Hi, everyone out there at the screens. A warm welcome to INCATE's Target Profile Workshop. I'm very happy to see you so numerously joining in. I'm Pete Seiler from INCATE, the incubator of antibacterial therapy in Europe. In the backstage, we have Helena Costa Pereira. Thank you very much, Helena. We will go very quickly to introduce INCATE, so the incubator for antibacterial therapy in Europe, for everyone being on the same stage. We then have the pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker and chair today, with Amanda, and I already take the chance now to quickly remind you for the first time that we have a Q&A button. Please use that one, as usually with every webinars these days, to ask your questions throughout the webinar. You can start even now. And we will, especially Amanda will then take care of the questions, and we will go and get back to questions even at the end and even beyond the end. So if you feel like your questions were not addressed, we will share how to reach out to INCATE at the very end so that we can actually even continue the discussion. Also to make aware everyone, we will record this session and it will be displayed on our social media channels and on our website. So if you miss important points or would like to share or advertise for it for the next one, please be aware that this will be available very soon. So I will start sharing my screen. To introduce you to today's subject, the TPP, Target Product Profile. When and why do you need one? We from INCATE, we are very convinced we need to discuss that, and we can hardly ever overdo it with discussing it because it's such an important tool and also strategic use for our goals. So the incubator for antibacterial therapies in Europe, we want to replenish the early antibacterial pipeline because we are convinced that's not looking good at the moment. We want to make sure we can mediate quality support of technologies to reach the next development phase to every venture that comes to us and is willing to help filling that early pipeline. We want to expand the AMR community and the network so that fostering mutual support is getting more easy and more successful. And last but not least also, and entrepreneurs clubs are into that goal number 4. We want to make sure that we retain the talents in the field and the knowledge that is desperately used in the AMR field. We do that by bridging basically ideas, and mostly they come from universities on their way to become an investable venture. And we do that by giving advice on market needs, medical needs, on how to build a quality translational plan. We do that in a second pillar by offering access to our community. So that's the collection of our portfolio ventures, but also our large collection and connections to experts, of 4 of them you will meet today. All these 2 first pillars, advice and community, are accessible. Very importantly, they are accessible to everyone who reaches out to us. We then do also give out some funding up to 250,000 euros, hopefully enabling answer critical questions. That's not available to everyone, but you have a fair chance to get there. And how we do that bridging is by actually living the bridge. So INCATE is organized by actually academic members and industry partners. INCATE was founded by the 4 academic members, NCCR Anti-Resist in Basel and the University of Basel, and then also the Leibniz Hans Knoll Institute in Jena, Germany, and the German Center for Infection Research in Braunschweig. And this is complemented by the Technological Research Institute Bioscience in Lyon in France. And these academic partners are responsible for the innovation sourcing, the scouting, and the venture support that I just mentioned with the first 2 pillars. And they also found and fund the operationals. And this is all connected and very well bridged to our industry partners, Shionogi, MSD Germany, Roche, and the venture capitalist firm Kineticos Life Sciences. They give in the money for the non-dilutive funding, and they also do the venture selection who gets that funding. We have been able to allocate, meanwhile, more than 1.4 million euros already, and we are looking very much forward to continue also doing that part of the bridge. And all is supported by a large collection of supporting partners that give us in-kind support. We are very happy to have a large breadth of expertise that you can, if you reach out to us, that you can access from starting from screening, hit to lead optimization, high throughput screening campaigns, up to all advice you may need to PK/PD correlations, regulatory aspects, upscaling of your modality. Don't hesitate to come to us. We may have a good answer and a good expert for you to connect to. And to make good use of all that, the TPP target product profile is central. This is our convincement that the target product profile is a strategic tool that can make the difference at critical milestones. And that's why it's so important to be aware that you need it from the very beginning, although you look from the end. So today we will show when and why having a TPP is essential. And this is mediated by the expert panel you will see and listen to in a minute. They will show you through real life experiences how a well-prepared TPP can transform vision into clarity, then clarity into alignment, and alignment into progress. That's what we are convinced. And who could kick off that session better than Amanda Burkardt? Amanda is CEO of Phiogen, venture developing next generation phage therapies, and I may say we are proud amongst many other achievements. Phiogen is also a INCATE portfolio venture. Amanda has 15 years plus experience in technology commercialization, consulting, scientific research. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in animal science, a Master of Science in molecular biology, and an MBA. She has done ample consulting, a high global reach, and a big connection to frequent speaking sessions, ample possibilities to get in touch with TPPs. Amanda is also a serial entrepreneur. So we are very happy to have you with us, Amanda. I guess I kick off giving you the screen. I did tell all the technicalities. I shut down myself and are looking forward to a very exciting and motivating session. Thanks for being with us, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Peter. You can hear me all right? Yes. Awesome. All right. I'm also going to see if I can't share my screen and it plays nicely with us. Okay. All right. Let me see. Okay. All right. I'm going to advance my slides. Is it working? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Peter, and the rest of the INCATE team, as well as our friends joining in virtually. It's nice to be here with everyone. So good morning or afternoon, wherever in the world you are. My name is Amanda Burkardt. Peter did a fantastic job of introing me, but I'm here to talk about how and why we use target product profiles, or TPPs, and how we at Phiogen have used it to advance our work. I'll also walk you through how we're applying this framework to bring our first-in-class phage therapeutic for recurrent urinary tract infections to the clinic. I'm also going to try to keep an eye on my time to make sure I'm honest and Peter doesn't get on to me for going over too much. So, for those of you who don't know, Phiogen is a Baylor College of Medicine spinout headquartered in Houston, Texas, at the Texas Medical Center, which is the world's largest medical complex. To date, we've secured approximately 1.5 million in funding through grant and other price-based support, We've recently moved into a brand new 5,000 square foot facility at Helix Park, which is essentially the innovation district at the Texas Medical Center. We're growing our team, and we're deeply committed to addressing the global crisis of drug-resistant bacteria, as well as chronic infections that plague millions of people across the world. At the core of our work is our six-step high-throughput technology platform that enables us to identify bacteriophages, or phages for short, with novel properties, and that powers a robust pipeline of clinical-ready product candidates that we are actively advancing towards the clinic. So a little bit about our pipeline. We're focused on developing biotherapeutics where current treatments fall short. So you can see here the three main programs that we have. And we're lucky that we get to partner with Baylor College of Medicine because I always say we got to build this business backwards. So we actually started the company based on some of the results that we saw from these emergency use cases, these EIND cases as they're known. And so what's neat is we got to see these phages working in people first before we ever decided to form a company and before we ever decided to form our programs. And so to date, there have been 9 patients with either life-threatening or chronic infections that have been successfully treated with phages that make up our lead products. And so this has enabled us to accelerate through kind of what a conventional phase 1 would be, and really kind of move towards the phase 1b trial. And that gives us a unique start and insight that a lot of other startup companies, kind of build in a traditional sense where you start with discovery, lead op, hip to lead op, and then all the way through preclinical. We kind of got to leapfrog that and backwards engineer it, which actually will be a theme throughout my presentation, especially as we start talking about how to develop your TPP, starting with the end in mind. All right, so that's a little bit about us and really what we're focused on, the top AMR pathogens, E. coli being number 1. So what is one of the main ailments that E. coli causes is recurrent urinary tract infections. It's a major unmet medical need, not only in the United States, but globally. Millions of people are affected. Disproportionately, women are 30 times more likely to get a urinary tract infection than men, and it can escalate from a painful recurrent infection to life-threatening disease. And nearly 60% of initial UTIs are already resistant to at least one antibiotic class, and long-term antibiotic prophylaxis has its own risks. So I always say if you know a woman, you know somebody who has suffered from urinary tract infections and has a great likelihood that they've suffered from recurrent UTIs. So this is a huge problem, and as we age, it only gets worse for men and women. So alarmingly, about a third of sepsis cases actually begin as UTIs. And we believe that this space is desperately in need of new thinking, and that's exactly where we come in. And so UTIs are actually one of the biggest offenders of improper usage of antibiotics, which actually only further drives this problem. So we really believe that this is a market segment and a patient population that needs real change. So that's where Phiogen comes in. So we've developed the first and only immunizing therapeutic that not only eliminates the active infection, but also prevents recurrence. So a lot of time when people are asking what I'm doing, they hear it's a phage company, they kind of roll their eyes and say, oh, another phage company. But actually, we've selected phages through our technology platform that have these unique properties that we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what phages can actually do. So because they're not small molecule, they're biologics, they can do things that small molecules can't. So we've discovered phages that actually stimulate the immune system as they're killing the bacteria, which really allows for this long-term prevention, which is the main problem of these chronic infections that we have. So I always say if a vaccine and an antibiotic had a baby, that's essentially what we've created. And so our candidates combine the antimicrobial activity with immunogenicity to generate this long-term infection protection. So instead of today's binary tools, antibiotics or vaccines, we've created a fixed formulation that kills the infection and trains the immune system to recognize against reinfection. So true paradigm shift. And really our goal is to prevent this recurrent E. coli infections that happen and can progress to sepsis. So this is where the idea of a target product profile, or TPP, becomes essential. So it assures that we're aligned on how we're developing our product and how it should perform when it actually rates our patients. So what is a TPP? You'll hear a lot of different uses and ways that people are implementing their TPPs, but I wanted to set the baseline of actually what it is for anyone who may be on this call and may be unfamiliar with it. So this is going to be a very high level summary, but I gave an example of what one of our earlier versions of a TPP looked like for us, which is on the right hand side. And so for just kind of a highlight, a TPP is essentially your patient and product on a piece of paper. It is a strategic document that lays out your intended indication, your target population, dosing, safety, efficacy, and differentiation versus standard of care. All of this is extremely important because it not only guides your R&D, but also from a regulatory and commercial decision-making stance, this is going to be a critical piece. And it really does act as a North Star for your drug development. So for us, we didn't want to wait till it was too late in the developmental plan to implement this. So we created our TPP as soon as we knew our target pathogen and indication. And this really has kept all of our stakeholders aligned from day one, including our internal team, and really has made it an efficient way to communicate with clinicians who are interested in learning about what we're doing, who might want to serve as a clinical trial site. So you have your key characteristics on the left-hand side of your TPP, what the minimum requirements would be, and then what ideal requirements would be. So that's kind of the outlay of a TPP and how you could use it. So how did we go about even drafting our TPP? Well, we started with the end in mind. I have a science, but also a business background. And from the business angle, you would call this a customer archetype. Who is your end user? But for us, because we're not necessarily having customers, we're having patient, call it our patient profile. So we actually name the patient. So the patient that would use our products and would benefit from our product, her name's Lisa. She's a female, she's 46, she's a bank teller and otherwise healthy. She's had these recurrent UTIs for over 5 years, suffering from 3 or more UTIs a year. She's been through multiple antibiotics, estrogen therapy, probiotics, cranberry supplements, none of which have worked. She's been hospitalized for urosepsis and her quality of life has diminished, and she's looking for a durable prevention strategy. So by building our TPP around Lisa, we've been able to ensure that we never lose sight of the end goal and who we're building this product for and delivering something that truly changed lives. And how we're able to develop this person is by talking to the people that interacts with Lisa. So Lisa herself and other people like Lisa, clinicians that treat Lisa, whether that's infectious disease, urogynecologist, urologist. The problem with recurrent UTIs, these patients jump around from different clinicians because nobody knows how to give them the relief they need because they have these recurrent infections. Researchers who are working on recurrent urinary tract infections, not only in the Texas medical system, but also outside, our collaborators. And then patient advocacy. I cannot express this enough about how important patient advocacy is. And, it was interesting. We found this group called Live UTI Free. They're a phenomenal group. Melissa is the CEO, and they actually have a global footprint where they have these people suffering from these UTIs. And so we knew from the get-go, in order to develop our product, we need to talk to these patients. So we partnered with Live UTI Free and we did a global patient advocacy and a survey. Together, we deployed a 70-question survey to more than 420 patients across 31 countries. And this collaboration provided us with unique, insights with direct feedback on what matters most and how patients view current options and how would they approach a phase-based product like ours. And hearing their voices really ensured our development pathway and is shaped by those that need it the most. And these are real-life quotes. After a urologist told me this year he doesn't know what else to do for me, it would be so amazing and this product would give me hope again. A lot of the patients that we had interviewed really said it wasn't just treatment they were interested in, it's prevention. And so that really gave us some groundwork into what our endpoints needed to be for a TPP. So here's actually some very high-level insights. Like I said, it was 71 questions, so these are only 4 of those questions. But here's the responses we heard. The patient voices described decades of recurrent infection, constant cycles of antibiotics. One woman in California said 6 months of relief would be life-changing. Another one from the UK shared how UTIs destroyed a relationship and how these stories highlight the urgency. Over 80% of these patients said they were comfortable receiving phage therapy intravenously, which was some of the pushback that we got from others in our network saying people will not be comfortable with this. And actually, the patients said they would be willing to drive, almost half said they'd be willing to drive over 9 hours to get 6 months of relief. So it just really shows how critically important it is to have the patients as part of this process. So I'm getting close to my time. So I just want to end on really the TPP. We went out strategically to know we wanted to get the patients' voices early on so that we could build that as part of our drug development pipeline and as part of our product profile. But your TPP should evolve and change with every stage. So this is an example of an earlier form of a clinical trial we designed before we did our patient survey, and has now since changed after we did this interview. But your TPP will change based on the patient voices, preclinical safety outreach, your endpoints, regulatory feedback, and even though it's supposed to be a North Star, and it should also be a living document that changes over time based on new information. So for us, our TPP ensured that every new data point that we got fed back into how we redefine our target profile, keeping us aligned from science, regulation, and commercial strategy. So I'll just end on a little bit about who we are. Again, we're seeking a Series A to fund this work through a phase 1b, 2a clinical trial with our lead products. And we're the only company that has developed a phage-based product that generates immunity, not just bacterial clearance. And we're really excited and proud of that. So, we are happy. If you have other questions for me, please, my information's below. Reach out to me or our website. We're also open to collaborators as well. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
I'm happy to address you right away. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for sharing your baby. Also, thanks a lot for sharing, Lisa, and sharing that it is a lot about interaction with people. You mentioned the interviewing process was helping a lot. Who else influenced you? Who annoyed you? Who challenged, and who brought the largest surprise, if you remember back?
About the surveys or about our
No,
TPP?
the TPP when it developed.
Yeah. For us, when we were first developing our TPP, we really thought a therapeutic endpoint was really what these patients would want. And of course, they want to get rid of their active infection. That is something that was really, really important. So our first iteration of our TPP was only therapeutic based, really. I mean, we didn't really have so an endpoint or even biomarkers that said so much more about prevention. But actually, after we started speaking with the patients, started speaking with the clinicians, it became extremely apparent and even investors that prevention actually was where the value lied. And so we went back to our TPP and we looked at it and we said, all right, therapeutic outcomes should be primary, but maybe from the secondary or exploratory endpoints, how should we be positioning ourselves? What biomarkers should we be looking at so that we could potentially build another for our next clinical trial? We could be more informed to have prevention as part of an endpoint that is meaningful. And so for us, we kind of went back to the drawing board, kept therapeutic as primary, but really looked to see how we could change our TPP to focus on prevention as well as therapeutic. So that took some time, and that came directly from patients and clinicians, but really patients.
This is a perfect keyword to next question from the audience, patients and clinicians. When accessing patients, did you need to go through clinicians, or is there a way to go
Yeah, a
around
really
them? I was
important
about to say.
question.
Yeah.
Heartbreakingly, I
Yeah.
get emails to our contact form. Somehow people find my email. Sometimes, even though it's not publicly available, people have found my cell phone number
Oh, wow. Okay.
and desperately have called me or emailed me with these just utter terrible, terrible stories. People suffering, their moms suffering from recurrent UTIs, other infections that, we would love to work on. We just don't have the bandwidth, Pseudomonas, things like that. So patients come to us a lot of the times, unsolicited. And of course, because we don't have a product yet, we try to give them resources to help them in any way that we can, whether that's through our own R&D partner at Taylor Labs that does do EIND cases, IPATH, some of these other organizations that can help them. So that's one way, a little bit unsolicited, but also from a clinician standpoint, there are KOLs that are just huge phage fans. Saima Aslam, Gina Suh, Barbara Trotner, just titans in the phage industry. We work with them from a clinician standpoint, and they've really guided us on our clinical trial design as
Okay.
well. But also the patient advocacy group. I mean, Melissa has just been huge. And so I will harp and harp and harp on anybody doing a TPP. Figure out who your patients are and see if there's a patient advocacy group that you can partner with because they will become your best friend. And I go to Melissa for lots of things. Connecting with other researchers in this space, other clinicians that maybe want to be involved. It's been a huge asset to
Yeah.
us.
Okay. I let me check. I think we can go for one more, which is very, very interesting one, and that addresses the bandwidth that you just mentioned. It, it is sometimes challenging to the TPP, obviously, and here there is a good one for looking at phages. Is your phage modality, I may call it, E. coli selective, and was that influencing the TPP from the beginning or
Oh, yeah.
backwards?
Oh, that's such a good question. I'll try to make this brief, but actually, yes. So I think I mentioned it very early on. So we actually, we were spun off from an E. coli lab,
Okay.
essentially. So we knew E. coli was really one of the bugs we wanted to target. However, Baylor's lab also got inundated over and over again with recurrent UTI requests, predominantly from E. coli. So we
Uh,
selected recurrent UTI because we knew our phages are, to answer the question, selective for E. coli and
okay.
actually only disease-causing strains, so not the commensal E. coli. So we knew whatever indication that we targeted needed to have a high preponderance of the infections being E. coli. And so that was another reason why we chose UTI because the data it varies, but it's about 80 to 90% of all UTIs are E. coli. And
Mhm.
so we knew the disease we needed to target had to have a high dominance of that one bug. Until we develop a polyvalent product, which we're working on, we needed to narrow down and try to get as many shots on goal as possible. So absolutely, the bug and the indication 100% shaped our TPP. And in fact, we didn't build our TPP until we knew what indication, what bug we wanted to go after. It's a great
Th-
question.
There are more great questions, but I guess we now go on. We keep them and sort of tailor them also to the end. Thanks a lot again. And now I really shut off. Now it's yours, Amanda,
Sure.
going on with the session. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So let me pull up my notes here so I can properly introduce Obadiah. I know he has his screen pulled up. So Obadiah Plant is PhD and SVP and head of research at Kinvard Bio, an emerging semi-virtual company based on chemistry technology, licensed from Harvard University. Kinvard Bio is pioneering the development of a new and differentiated class of ribosome-targeting antibacterials that overcome a wide range of pre-existing resistant mechanisms. Kinvard Bio is a seed stage company founded by Kineticos Life Sciences and is currently advancing programs towards phase one trials. So I will be looking at the questions that come in, Obadiah, and towards the end of your presentation, I will try to field some of those questions for you as Peter did. So thank you. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, Amanda. And thanks to the INCATE team for the chance to talk about TPPs. But before we jump into that, I just want to share with you a little bit about Kinvard Bio, much the same way that Amanda did. We're in the AMR space. We're developing direct-acting antimicrobials. And we feel that this is one of the most important areas to work in all of medicine. Yet, based on antimicrobial resistance, reimbursement, antibiotic stewardship, it can be a very challenging commercial environment. So I'd like to walk you through a little bit about how we've set up Kinvard Bio and how we use TPPs really quantitatively to set up our programs for success in the future. So very briefly, Kinvard Bio was less than a year old. It was created out of the lab of Andy Myers at Harvard University, who's been developing OPPs, or oxyphenylprelenamides, which are a next-gen version of lincosamide antimicrobials. He's been developing this technology for the better part of the last 10 years. About 3 years ago, he was part of a seed grant with Carbex to profile his compounds to a deeper level. And more recently, Carbex has entered into a partnership with Kinvard Bio in the lead op space for gram-positive infections. Now, when Kinvard Bio was formed, it was formed by an investment firm, Kineticos Life Sciences, and their AMR action and their AMR fund, the Camera Fund. It was important to the Kineticos team to focus on AMR and to do it in the most efficient way possible. So we've been building the company over the course of the last year to focus on the programs in the bottom right in a very disciplined way, where we've created 3 programs. I'll talk with you briefly about the middle one, KVO02, towards the end of this, where we're trying to develop an oral and IV gram-positive drug that's a direct-acting antimicrobial. It's currently in the lead-up phase with Carbex at the moment. But I would say central to all of our programs is the TPP. We actually start with that before we even create a program. What are we trying to do for patients? And then how do you get there based on what's known about the science and what steps need to happen to get you to your desired drug product. So when we think about TPPs, we're in the direct-acting antimicrobial space, and that's a fortunate space to be in on one hand because there are a lot of TPPs to go to. It's not a non-traditional type of intervention where you might have to create your own TPP. There are well-known and studied TPPs in this space. Here's an example of one in the gram-positive space from the WHO. The TPPs are really essential in guiding product development. They're created by experts, either in the global health space or in the industry space, and they need to be specific for the products that you're developing. In this case, we're talking about a gram-positive antimicrobial. They're important not just for developers, but they're important for funders. From any granting agency, one of their first questions will be, what's your TPP? They're important from investors as well, because they really do guide all of the work that you do. It's important to consider a TPP at the earliest stage of a program. And we'll go through in the next slide a little bit more detail on what that means. They're a must-have. And as we kind of take a step back and think about TPPs, they give you an opportunity to think about really what's next. I mean, they're well laid out. You have to have efficacy, you have to have the antimicrobial spectrum, you have to have the route of administration. And that's something that they can be used for if you're early in your efforts to think about what steps you have to do to get to the next level. I would also say it's important to talk to partners and seek their input on TPPs. As Amanda pointed out, it's really important to talk to the patients and potential partners in the space to figure out if they agree with the current TPP that you're working towards. There may be a particular partner that's interested only in treating hospital-acquired infections and nothing in the community, in which case they may be completely happy with an IV product and may not need an oral product. And the other thing that I'll say is TPPs are really a good tool. If you consider them early, you develop them in parallel with your product to be able to use as you're considering partnering, which in the AMR space is incredibly important strategy to take early technology and advance it to commercialize products. So if we take a broader look at, or maybe a wider look at what a TPP looks like, this is draft guidance. This is taken directly from the link on the previous page from the WHO, where they routinely revise their TPP guidance. Again, this is taken from the gram-positive space. This is really a living document. So these are modified in real time based on the current standard of care, based on current resistance trends, and based on hospital practices. So there's a lot of information on this slide, and I'm sure others will get into more detail about what it all means and how you create this type of information. But if you look at it at a high level, there's an attribute on the left-hand side, a minimal TPP in the middle, and an ideal TPP on the right-hand side. You want to make sure that whatever you're working on is important enough to be used as a medicine. There are a lot of choices everyone can make in the science space, and using a TPP as guidance helps you figure out what types of pathogens you should really be working towards, what types of medicines you should be developing in terms of how they're administered and how they're going to be used by doctors on patients, in whatever the indication is that you're choosing. And I'll highlight a few key areas on this slide. One are the pathogens that are covered here, the routes of administration, and then efficacy and safety. And we'll come back to that towards the end as being really kind of I'd say the minimal requirements that one needs to move forward with a TPP. But as I described at the top, Kinvard Bio is a relatively new company. We've been in operation for less than a year. And when initially looking at a TPP for what one should target, this can be a little bit overwhelming, to be honest. So what the company did, and what a lot of folks do kind of early in their development, is they take a step back. So there's the target product profile. We also need the candidates to put into that. And by candidates, I mean the compounds, right? So we've used a process which a number of companies do, which we'd call a target candidate profile. And this is really for discovery stage research to be able to create products that have the right type of spectrum, the right type of activity in terms of overcoming resistance mechanisms, potency, stability, specificity, all the essential criteria that one needs for the compounds to be able to hit potentially the desired TPP. And that this TCP, or a target candidate profile, really drives the selection of compounds. And on the right-hand side, I know there's a lot of detail there, but we'll walk through it just very quickly. You know, the idea of building a new drug starts with discovery. It always does. And particularly in the AMR space, there are well-defined metrics that one needs to hit along the way. So if we walk through the screening cascade, on the right, and in the context of the Kinvard experience, really over the last 10 plus years, hundreds of OPP analogs have been created within the company. We're currently working through tiering experiments to down select the best analogs. So tier one would be looking at in vitro assays and cytotoxicity. Tier two would be doing more profiling of those compounds and moving into in vivo studies. As we move down to tier three, you're starting to look at things like secondary MICs and frequency of resistance, while modeling dose response in vivo models. And then eventually you're getting down to candidate selection and development candidate nomination. And the TPP is really what drives this, right? I mean, this is what drives, everything that happens in this at the compound level is guided by what the TPP is steered one towards. And in terms of, let's say the Kinvard experience, we've been working with the Carbex team, which is an important funder and accelerator in the AMR space for a number of years. And the early work really identified a series of compounds that were of high interest. And over the last several months, we've been working with that Carbex team to create a program based on their ideal TPP that would allow us to down select OPPs and move to development candidates. And it's really about developing a candidate that fits with the right target patient profile. So on the left-hand side, here we describe how one would develop a candidate that aligns with the TPP, and I'll come back to some of the top criteria that we use. One is pathogen spectrum. You have to have an antimicrobial that covers the proper gram-positive bacteria that are part of the TPP. In our case, we're looking at cab skin indications, and those need to overcome the pre-existing resistance mechanisms that have reduced the activity of a number of antimicrobials with standard of care antibiotics. The compounds have to have an appropriate ADME and tox profile. They have to avoid drug-drug interactions and establish a therapeutic index that's useful for patients. You have to be able to establish a PK/PD driver for your compounds. Is it time over MIC? Is it AUC over MIC? This will allow you to guide the doses that are used in the clinic and potentially the regimen that you're using. And the route of administration is really important here. Oral dosing is essential in the gram-positive space. And we look at IV and oral dosing as being critical to what we're doing, particularly on the oral side of things. We want to hit the ideal TPP. Nobody wants to end up with their minimal TPP, even though it might be completely valuable. And really, one of the things that we're doing in partnership with Carbex is to optimize for oral bioavailability. And all of these happen with our own OPPs that we've developed, or new antimicrobial analogs. But it's also important to profile your compounds against potential clinical comparators, and really establish that you either are or are not better than what's out there. And we use the TPPs in our TCP in a very quantitative way. You either are or are not better than what's out there today. Knowing that in the end, drug discovery decisions are holistic. You have to have spectrum. You have to have enough drug on board and delivered in the right way to be effective. And I'll close with just saying on the right-hand side, communication is really important here. It's not just about building data sets and building candidates. That communication with partners, and I'll use Carbex as an example here, happens over the course of months, 2 years to get to the proper point. So we've used TPPs to guide the work that we're doing. We've backed that into a project plan, which is very detailed down to the experimental level, over a period of months to years, to be able to deliver development candidates. And we're very happy to be working with the Carbex team. For a small company like Kinvard, non-dilutive funding is great. But to be honest, access to the expertise and be able to work through some of the challenges of developing antimicrobials is even better. And we do try to ensure that all of our objectives align with the current TPPs that are out there. And just in closing, I just like to say we're trying to build the best products, with the best profiles for patients. And we found that the most efficient way to do that is in collaboration. Here we have Carbex as an example. We're also very open to partnering very early in our programs to try to get to the best products in the shortest period of time. So, and with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Obadiah. Appreciate that. We do have a couple of questions that come in, and I think it really highlights the uniqueness of the way that you guys also built your company, maybe not in a traditional sense, and partnering early on. So one of the questions that came in is, did you work with Carbex before gaining funding or after?
Yeah, so with Carbex, I mean, there's an interesting history there, and I'll say yes to both of those. So as you know, Carbex has a very kind of rigid selection process that they go through. The team at Harvard first started working with Carbex, maybe 2003, 2004. They had applied through the Carbex program. Again, the academic researchers applying for an early hit to lead program. And the team at Carbex, thought that the scientific data was really compelling. This broad spectrum activity against gram positives, and we're starting to see that against gram negatives as well, based on increased target engagement, from some of the early compounds. But the Carbex team, thought it really didn't fit their criteria, right? It certainly wasn't in the lead optimization phase 2 years ago, and it wasn't really even in the hit to lead phase. So they kind of created a new bucket for the program, which was called the seed grants. And the Carbex team worked really closely with the Harvard team to create, an early seed, type of an early seed grant that allowed the team at Harvard to generate a lot of data that we put in that kind of target candidate profiling phase. And more recently, Kinvard has been working to extend that funding, and we've worked with the Carbex team directly to create a lead optimization program that was recently funded back in July.
Amazing. Thank you, Obadiah, for sharing all that with us. I think these are your Kinvard Bio as Phiogen are two really good examples of how there are different ways that innovation can be spun off in this space and how two different partnering mechanisms can allow for companies to grow in this traditionally hard funding space. So thank you. We're running a little bit tight on time, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward with our next presenter, Leander. Who it looks like yep, the slides are up. So Dr. Leander Grode, CEO of Serum Life Science Europe, is a regulatory consultancy company based out of Hanover, Germany. At Serum Life Science Europe, her and her team have developed the know-how to navigate around obstacles in biopharmaceutical product development. They are part of Serum Institute of India, the world's largest vaccine manufacturer, and they recommend early TPP design because it helps biotech startups align scientific innovation with regulatory expectations and market needs from the start, saving time, reducing costly work, and increasing the chances of successful development and partnering. So I will turn it over to Dr. Leander to move us forward through this presentation.
I was still on mute.
Oh, there we
Sorry
go.
for that. So thank you, Amanda, for introducing it. It was very nice. And thank you also for INCATE to give us the chance to present our view on a regulatory perspective of TPP. And you had already two very good examples and also very advanced examples of how a TPP can be used. Before I get into the details of that, I would give you a very brief overview. What we are doing in consultancy, it's a regulatory consultancy mainly on biologics, vaccines, but also beyond that. And we help also to navigate through clinical trials, having the sponsorship. If you come from outside Europe and want to do a clinical trial over here in Europe, and or if you don't have the proper quality management system, all of that we also help to provide and get it set up for your companies and early stage biotechs. But bring us back to the target product profile. As it now has been mentioned several times, and Amanda put it out very nicely, that is a North Star of yours where you can navigate all your development through, is really help to focus and stay focused on your goal to achieve, to get a product into humans and finally into the market. And as you already heard, there are now advanced mechanisms with the TPP. There is not such one TPP. It's a living document. That's what we heard already. You can have a minimal, ideal, and midway development target product profile. All of that can help you and can make also kind of stage gating your whole development through and get your product achieved in a minimal time and without losing too much money on the way by going into the wrong directions. The regulatory strategy is key also in that whole philosophy. And part of that philosophy is the target product profile. But we always get the question from early startups, when is the best time to interact with regulatory agencies? And we always recommend have that very early on. When you start manufacturing, when you plan your preclinical development, what kind of animal models you should use. Is there maybe a way out? You may have not to use an animal model because there is none. Things like that can all be discussed with the regulatory agencies. It should be done. But to get there, you need to have also the target product profile aside to guide also the regulators where you want to go, because they always see it from a safety perspective. They see what is your target product or group, your target population, where you want to finally end up with the product, and how risky and how much risk is associated with that development. And I come with some examples on that later on. And the earlier you get your definitions in that way that it leads you to the next step, that will help you to guide through in a lean manner. To have a regulatory strategy plan, as I said, it starts with a product profile. And it doesn't have to be such elaborated as you have already seen in Obadiah's talk, which is an excellent way, but this is very advanced already. And you should start training yourself with small baby steps and move ahead, and then finally end up with such a nice one where you have a minimal requirement and ideal requirements. That would be then the perfect ultimate strategy at the end of the day. But with a regulatory strategy plan, you can do a lot of your development plan in a way that you streamline already your manufacturing, your preclinical testing, and finally also your clinical, which is the most expensive part most of the time, to have a lean development way. And why is it so? If you have the classical value chain and the classical development, you start with the discovery, you have a product, interesting one, which works on a certain bacteria, or you find something which works on cells. Then you start your manufacturing and so on and so forth. That would be the nice way how people think, but actually you should reword it. And we heard it already. Peter was pointing that out in his part of introduction. You have to reword your thinking. You have really to think from the market. As Amanda already presented, you have to see what is your target population, what are your patients at the end, and how they want to get it. Do they want to have an oral application? Do they want to have a topical application? Do they want to have tablets whatsoever? Do they want to have it every day? Or they prefer to have it once a month? All these things have to come into your considerations, and then you plan all the development backwards. Then you sketch out very roughly how your phase 3 can look like. Then you get a bit more detailed on the phase 2, and then a bit more detailed on your phase 1. With that, then you can focus on your preclinical development and also your manufacturing. With that, you present this to the authorities because they will do the same. They will look at your target product profile, at your product, and want to see where you're going. And depending, are you going into patients or are you going in infants, for example, in healthy kids? That is a different risk factor which they have to account for the whole development. Is it someone healthy or is it late-stage cancer patients you're targeting? That has a different risk profile. And that comes with that reverse planning. And then you have finally your target product profile. And you have seen already some of these examples today. And it looks much more simple at the first glimpse than it's actually be. And you have to sit down with some colleagues of yours. Don't do that alone. You have to have someone to reflect and bounce it back and discuss it. It starts already defining your product. That is the most difficult thing. People always think, oh, it's so easy. I have an anti-drug or a drug which is based on an antibiotics. But yeah, it's not enough. It's how the compound is presented. How is it formulated? All these things have to be also taken part of it. And that takes quite some time. And that needs also a lot of discussions back and forth. And with that, you go down the line and you may stumble across things like price. I don't know what the price may be in the future. I hope it might be this or that. Yeah, but then you have also to consider again your ultimate target group you're hitting. I have a very nice example of a project we had in our hands, which was a malaria project. And we couldn't get the price for manufacturing of that product below $30. And that is too high for a product in such an indication for malaria. And if you can't see any way out of that, you rather stop the development or focusing on something different or focusing on a new manufacturing process, which may be cheaper and get the things aligned. But you need to have an idea in which range of price you end up. Is it a cancer product for the developed world? It's a different price tag than for poverty-related disease, which will be then your target group maybe in Africa, South America, or elsewhere. The TPP is a kind of a wish list. As we have seen, also Obadiah showed it, as I said, very nicely in an advanced model. There you can have a real wish list of the ideal product, and then you can step down from that saying, well, what is the minimum requirement I would foresee or would like to have or needs to be as minimum? Because some things are hard facts, as I said. If you have a product which is for a poverty-related disease and is cost already within the manufacturing 30 euros or $30, that's way too much. That is a no-go. That's end of that project, until you find something new on that manufacturing part. So therefore, there are must-haves in, and there are things which you would like to have. For example, people always dream of, instead of injecting, you have something liquid to swallow only, or you put a plaster on your skin, a topical treatment, things like that. That is nice to have, but it's not a must-have. And then this helps you also to direct you later in which kind of unique selling points you're going to have. And I pointed out already, and Amanda did it very nicely as an example, your target population. And this is one of the key factors, as I was mentioning, in the whole development strategy and planning of it. And that is the normal chain, how you go through that. But there are key factors which in that selection process, and that starts with your innovation. What is unique to it? What does it make different than the existing treatments? Then you go with a regulatory strategy. Following that, from this marketing differentiation, you cave out what is really your selling factor at the end. Commercial strategy, all of that will lead you then to that point. Yeah, and ultimately, if you have that idea of your target population, that is not only one idea that comes in with regulatory perspective, that is a commercial perspective in it, that is also a medical team, medical need perspective in it. It's not a single view that you think, oh, that must be a huge market. Maybe it's not a huge market, it seems so, but because regulators see it's completely different, that there is no medical need, or others don't see it like this. So you have to discuss with various people in the field, not only with the target population as such, but also with those who prescribe the medication at the end of the day, with the regulators, which supposed to support your development. And all of that comes into that analysis of yours for a target product profile. And the challenges are various. And the biggest part is the heterogeneity of the patient population in that sense. But also here, when you have a good basis on preclinical testings, define your product very nicely, you know already where to go, what kind of target you have within the pathogens. These kind of things help already also for the patient population and minimize maybe the heterogeneity, and or advancing that you can say, well, it can be huge, it can be a gross one. Regulatory hurdles. If you have problems of defining your product, or you don't get a difference between a live product and a dead product, these kind of things are also go into the target product profile in the manufacturing section, and also helps you to make decisions for your further development. So, and with that, I would like more or less to end it, because I'm now up with my time, and just want to say the target population is a starting point with the definition of your product, which is a fun thing to do within the company, to ask everyone in the company, what is your product you're developing? Please define it. And you will see you get 10 answers from 9 people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leander. I think that was a great way to end it, and you're absolutely right. That is a great exercise to start off with, because you think everyone is aligned until you start actually talking and discussing, and you may actually be very far off, which makes it difficult when you're all trying to row in the same direction. So that's a great point. One of the other things I heard you say that I've heard Obadiah say, and to some extent what I said as well, external communication is key. You have to, once you have a TPP, that is time to release it and get buy-in from other people and let them tear it up, and good, bad, and ugly. So I heard that. In fact, we also had somebody in the Q&A spot, Michael Schramm said, I can fully confirm what Leander is saying regarding us regulators. So you have some validation there. We do have a question for you from Sina Gerbash. It says, When I'm very new to drug development, since I have an academic background and I have a very detailed and broad MIC testing across many strains, including resistant isolates, can I and how do I choose an indication from this early point already?
That is a very good, very difficult questions. And let me assure you, you're not the only one. It has nothing to do if you're early in the development or later. The broader your platform, let's call it this way, is, the more difficult it is to choose the right indication. And that also needs a lot of thoughts, because not only the biggest market may be your most interesting part, because if you're a small biotech or you want to be a small biotech, maybe you select a niche which is more, can be more targeted in a certain way. For example, that you have more defined patients. Also, the access to the patients is key, because not, for example, a lot of people in the cancer field go maybe for breast cancer, and because it's a huge market. But on the other hand, it's full of companies trying to get hold of patients. And if you, as a small biotech, also want to get into that, will be very difficult. But if you may select another tumor, which your product maybe also works, but it's not that high medical need or has the huge numbers, you may find that more lucrative for your proof of concept at the end of the day. So answering your question, yeah, you have to define something which is not only high medical needs, so maybe also a niche indication. Can't hear you.
I said that's great feedback and can be a little counterintuitive when people are first trying to build their TPP. So there are a couple of other questions, some that are addressed to all of us and some that are addressed to a single person. For time's sake, I'm going to move to Dr. Kerstin, and then afterwards, we've allotted some time to address some of these other questions. But thank you, Dr. Leander. Really appreciate that. And I don't know in this slide if you wanted to mention about the symposium.
Yeah, well, sorry, yeah, I switched off. So the symposium will be next week, Thursday and Friday in Hanover. And I only can say everyone is invited to come over. It's a mix of what to do for a biotech startup and also academia research presented over there and our network. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leander. Now we will hear a presentation from Dr. Kerstin Bode-Greuel, who is a physician and co-founder at Bioscience Valuation, BSV GmbH, a globally engaged company based in Germany, Munich area, and Berlin, focusing on value-driven R&D, management, and the valuation of life science assets. BSV combines expertise in the areas of medicine, science, and finance, and delivers market assessments often based on primary market research. At any stage of R&D, TPPs are the core of BSV's work because they help align innovation with medical, market, and regulatory needs and facilitate communication with all stakeholders. So I know, yes, we have it pulled up here. So Dr. Kerstin, I will leave the floor to you, moderate Q&A afterwards, and then we'll set some time aside for all of us to answer some more questions.
Okay. Am I operating the slides, or who is, I think Helena is operating the slides, right? Wonderful. So first of all, I would like to say I was very glad about the 3 previous presentations, because everything is something I can support. And actually, you have paved the way for me that I may not have to go into detail in one or the other aspect of TPPs. My experience with the TPPs stems from the 80s of the 1980s to 90s. I was then working as a global program leader for a product in development for various indications at various stages, and at Bayer. And Bayer has introduced this methodology in the context of other methodologies for value-driven management, so valuation and so on. So that was my experience as a user and TPPs, and a person that has to make sure that the TPP is built properly and brings together all the expertises that is necessary and all functions that are relevant in a pharmaceutical company. So now, as a person working and building and working at Bioscience Valuation, I have for each individual asset that I evaluate, or we also do project validation. So teams come to us and they have a certain project, and we kind of detail it even more in order to be able to have a reasonable valuation at all, and maybe also value particular scenarios. And this is where we do and look at, do and recommend certain aspects for TPPs used in both pharma and biotech. And if we now go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I have just summarized what I think has been mentioned before. So TPP in the pharma, biotech, and life science industry is a strategic document. It describes from the perspective of the end in mind, as Leander has outlined, what the product should be when development is finished. It's the blueprint of the product. It is cross-functional, so there will probably not be a single person who can create this product or this template itself. So we bring together all the activities that are needed to bring a product forward in development. Therefore, it's also a consensus process that is necessary. And this is what I noticed when I worked especially in larger companies. So the clinical department can be very far away from the technical departments. It is very important, and the farthest away can be marketing, in particular in early stage projects. So usually marketing takes responsibility with the phase goal, goes into phase 2 or 3, but not in preclinical or in earlier stage clinical development. So this is something we have to make sure, as we heard before, for example, investigating the opinion of users, patients, physicians, prescribers for an innovative product that someone has in mind. So to get this information as early as possible. So we see here all the elements of a TPP. We have seen this multiple times before. For me, a TPP contains stop-go criteria. And that is the hardest point to define, because nobody likes to be nailed down to a certain objective in a quantitative way, for example. And if we now go to the next slide, please. We just see an example which pretty much looks the same to what we have seen before. It's a matter of taste, whether we add more elements that go more into the specific areas of certain functions. What I find important to mention here, that, and I usually use this systematic, we have a target profile, minimum and upside. The target profile must be aligned with the scope of the investment. We can only reach the target when we invest adequately. Often in a bigger organization, this is not really firmly considered. So you don't do clinical studies as have been done before by a very strong competitor, but you have to check whether you do the clinical studies with the objectives that are relevant for this particular product. Therefore, the investment has to be, or the planning, the budget planning has to be aligned with what we are trying to achieve, and of course the planning of the elements in a clinical trial and so on. A minimum is often discussed in a way, well, if we have a product that doesn't fully achieve its target, but less, how much lower can it be to be still economically attractive? Is it then still innovative or not? So what is the minimum of the safety profile, for example, for an antibiotic? A minimum is definitely a potential stop criteria when you go below than what is put down here on the list. So you can imagine what kind of discussion you will have in the team to really think about such aspects. Upside can have two backings. First of all, it can be a lucky outcome. Your results can be better than anticipated. Or it might require even more investment, otherwise you wouldn't get there. So again, this very sharp logical thinking in the context of the whole team, of the experts around the table, I believe is very helpful to make sure that you can really work in the right way for a particular project. If we go to the next slide, please, we see I've just have designed a fake project. So that's not really pressure tested. So forgive me if it's not really meeting the best version. So I thought if we have, for example, now an early project, like before phase 2, that is designed for complex urinary tract infections, maybe as planned to be a first-line therapy. It could be the first oral therapy for complex UTIs with less resistance development compared to standard of care. So you could decide to say, we go into the general population in the adults, 18 years or older, with more investment. You could potentially reach an upside and say, we could also either immediately in parallel or maybe as a second step, develop this drug for children, age 12 plus. And then in marketing, you can consider, is this a real sophisticated, is it a real good goal to do that? How many patients do we have in certain age groups? So there is a kind of an iterative component in generating that profile. You can say we would not be straightforward, we use this in monotherapy, or you can say I invest in further studies to show that it can be used in combination, may even be more effective in combination, or may also be safe in combination. Again, more is investment required. You can go for a cure rate of 90%, and you can see that your cure rate is even higher. So if you design the study properly, you maybe can make use of such additional benefit. You can also, for example, for secondary endpoints, go for additional information. For example, if you see you would like to show in vitro or in animal experiments, whatever is more suitable, that you can destroy biofilms more effectively than other antibiotics. Maybe this could be potentially an important feature that would increase the value of your product and could give rise to further indications that would then require further additional distinct TPPs. If we now go to the next slide, I would like to mention that a TPP of the kind I showed before, with not so quantitative information in later stages of development, plus also if you have more functions in the internal in your company, you could say that clinical development will most likely have an own TPP on top of this, saying, I have now in the project management derived TPP, not the details of what I need to deliver in a proof of concept trial. And the whole discussion of how should the proof of concept trial be set up in order to not transfer too much risk into the later stages, but give enough information to give us confidence to go into the phase 3 in the general population, and also maybe enough confidence to be able to find a partner if we need one. So this may then be considered in a separate document that the clinical colleagues will work on in more detail. And the same is true, and that this is, in my experience, something that also happens quite often in CMC development. We heard before that cost of goods could be a really important factor, and it's always an important factor in the profitability of a product. So such aspects like cost of goods or formulation details, go we this way or that way? Does it have to be a capsule? Can we do it in the form of a tablet? What else? So such information will then dealt with in the CMC development. There will be a feedback to the general team, And then in this way, the TPP can be updated. So it is in fact a living document, but it must really be used in that way in order to bring along the biggest benefit that it can have. And there's one last slide where I'd like to have a little summary. So mentioned already, think backwards from the end. And if you are in drug discovery, again, this was also mentioned, it's very important to, although this may be completely different, separate department, separate people that are not commonly in contact with the development functions, already think about when you are in a certain indication, what would this mean for in development? Seek information from later stages into the early stage to make sure that in drug development and in drug discovery, you are on the right path. I had one example in a company that was actively engaged in inflammatory diseases. And the discovery development was working on inflammatory bowel disease. And then at a presentation, suddenly they got the feedback, oh, we do not mean bowel, we mean lung. Yeah. And then I asked, what is the company strategy? Do we have a strategy document where the company wants to go with? How could people go in the early stage drug discovery without such documents? So I think this is the importance of having consensus documents in an organization to be able to do the right thing in the most proper way. For biotech companies, I think this is easier because the group is smaller, but still the same type of information is needed. So it may be necessary to get information from outside agencies like market research. They would not do themselves naturally, but also other information like market information or recommendations from drug regulatory affairs specialists or also clinical specialists to be able to understand what the project really requires in order to be a competitive product later when it comes to the market in order to be approvable. So Amanda has mentioned already very extensively that's very important to get the viewpoint of patients, prescribers, and the market in general on whether or not certain aspects of the product need to be considered in more depth. Last but not least, I would like to mention something that was not, I think, mentioned before. Generating TPPs in an organization, and maybe mostly in pharma, but it may also apply to research, it may apply to any organization, have a political note, so to say. So it is important to really interact in a very open-minded way, in an honest way, and also to listen colleagues from other functions who say, I'm sorry, this is nice, but from my point of view, it's not feasible, it's too expensive. Again, cost of goods, for example, or whatsoever. It is really sometimes a little bit difficult to get this consensus, but it is important. And I can only recommend to everyone working anywhere in that space where contributions to TPPs are required, do it anyway and do it with the best you can. It will be a benefit for your organization if products can be developed based on a good TPP in the fastest possible way and in the most successful way. Yeah, and that's all what I wanted to say. So thank you very much for taking attention.
Thank you, Dr. Kerstin. I appreciate it. I know we have about 12 minutes left, and so I just want to summarize what we heard today. For everyone on the call, I think it's important to know that none of us saw each other's presentations before we gave them. And the one thing I saw written on every single person's presentation in some context or form was begin with the end in mind, which actually is really great that we saw that streamline again across all of our presentations without any of us seeing them first. Some of the other themes I heard was aligning the stakeholders, external communication, and making sure your internal team understands the strategic goals of your company, your product, and the end goal of the TPP. So whether that was the unique partnerships that Biogen has had with our partner at Baylor College of Medicine, partnerships that Kinvard Bio had with their early engagement with Carbex from a funding standpoint. Dr. Leander mentioned about getting regulatory buy-in early on. And then Dr. Kerstin mentioned more on the market and clinic side and making sure that those were aligned. So really happy to hear that synergy amongst all of our presentations without any of us knowing what we were really going to talk about other than TPP. So I want to transfer over now to some of the questions we didn't get to. Some of them are directed to specific people, but there is one that addresses all of us. And I would say if you can keep your answer to maybe about a minute or two, so we go through some of these. One of the questions was to all. Using the TPP as a tool to interact with investors, regulatory agencies, in-house, etc., did you ever face a fundamental misunderstanding that we all should avoid? So, I will direct this question maybe one by one. We'll go down the line. Obadiah, you're next on my little queue. Do you want to take that question on in maybe a minute or two, and then I'll move to Dr. Leander and then Dr. Kerstin.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So in terms of, communicating TPPs to investors, funders, partners, that's part of the role. It should be anticipated that that's something that just kind of has to happen. And it's not necessarily, a value add or a value detract, along the way there. It's just, it's part of the process. I haven't come across anything that I'd say would be kind of fundamentally difficult or wrong in any of those discussions. But I can say, every partner that you will ever talk to, whether it's, a funder, a biotech company, a regulatory agency, they will have an opinion on a TPP, and it may or may not align with the one that you're developing. So it's just important to Kirsten's point, to really keep an open mind in those discussions, that there's value in all perspectives on a TPP, and it may be that there's a new opportunity for the product that you're trying to develop, with a kind of a slight twist on a previous TPP, which you probably spent a lot of time, working on and thinking about. But there might be more opportunities that come out of it.
Thanks, Obadiah. Dr. Leander, as a reminder,
Yeah.
the question is, did you ever face a fundamental misunderstanding that we all should avoid as it relates to TPP?
No, we personally never had that problem, but as already pointed out, everyone who you're going to present that will have his own particular thoughts on the individual parts of the things which makes a TPP. But what we always recommend is, as I said, have also a check with your TPP and your your strategy to develop with regulators, because afterwards, then you can more focusing on what you have presented to them, and if they agree to that, and then present it to investors. That at least gives you a backing from a regulatory pathway that this has seen by someone else than only you, and you can fly with that way forward.
Thank you, Dr. Leander. Dr. Kerstin.
Okay, so things to avoid if you go for investors was also part of that question. And I think if you are asking for funding, if you are approaching investors, VC companies, for example, for the first time, you would probably you would include a TPP, definitely, but you would probably prefer a less detailed version, more like even more strategic. Why do we need this product? That's the question that an investor at that stage has. If you continue, let's assume you have investors on board. It is an ideal tool to bring it up every time you talk about progress that you made. Maybe also every time you talk about some failed studies that may occur, and you say, this was our goal, and to what extent have we failed, and why is it potentially still attractive to go ahead? And what is then maybe a deviation from the original TPP to say, this is still attractive because the colleague was making a market analysis and it appears it's still an option to go ahead. So if you go to regulators, you'll probably use a little bit of different language there. Also detail in certain aspects you haven't needed for other target populations, so to say. And you can now kind of think about every potential stakeholder, whether the TPP serves its role to communicate. So I see the communication role here is maybe not so much the consensus role, but it can still be ignited by having this template in place to say, let's talk about it. Are we on the right path?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, it's interesting. The question's interesting as it says fundamental misunderstanding to avoid. I would build on top of what everyone has already said in that a misunderstanding can come across as many things. I would just say, as you are looking at your TPP, as we've said before, make sure you're getting buy-in from other folks, clinical regulators, partners, and make sure that your TPP makes sense. When you read it and you look at it, make sure there is no contradictions. Look at what your proposed endpoints are and make sure those endpoints match the target patient population, match your products, have realistic deliverables in the minimal requirement as well as the ideal. Sometimes I've seen some TPPs in the past that you look at it and from kind of surface level, it makes sense. But when you actually step back and from a patient perspective, you're looking, maybe there's a route of administration that from a product perspective makes sense, but from a patient perspective doesn't. And so getting the buy-in from patients, clinicians, regulators, very important. And then also, I would say regularly, a living, evolving document, taking a look at it and making sure that there's not misunderstanding even within your own team and your own design. And so I think these are all really good points. I know we only have a few more minutes left. There was one question from Derry that was asking about potential investors if it's valuable. I think we've answered that. The answer is yes. And just knowing that a TPP is a living document, it can change based on new information, and it should. Another question that just came in, is the TPP tool relevant only for drug development, or is it also important for medical device development? I'm not an expert on this, so I won't answer this. Dr. Kerstin, you want to take a stab at it?
I would say definitely. So for me, I even would go one step further. All the times when you invest in R&D, and not even always life science, and you have a stepwise investment policy, plus you have to consider regulatory aspects and we have to consider market aspects. It's always useful to have a TPP. And I would say pharmaceutical and also medical advice, everything related to life science is particularly important because you are working with living systems. So there is a point, and I think now medical device patient close, so to say, something that is close to patients, maybe not something like you have a better syringe or something like that. So that should definitely also have a TPP, in my opinion. But maybe the others have other opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, Dr. Leander, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Oh, I would fully agree to that. That is always needed in various fields, and there is no real limit, not even, I would even say, beyond that. Whatever you want to develop, you need to have a kind of a requirement list, and that is the target product profile, and that is how you follow. Otherwise, you will go upside down in all kind of ways, but not directly forward.
Yeah, agreed. We have a couple more questions. There was one that was directed a little bit to me, and it mentions the importance of bifurcation has been made in a clinical study with regards to lifestyle choices or importance of putting female health at the forefront with high importance, priority, and urgency. I'll answer this very briefly. For us in our company, the indication that we have selected to move forward with disproportionately affects women. It doesn't only affect women. Recurrent UTIs can happen amongst men. Definitely as we age, both men and women are susceptible. But men can get something called prostatitis, which is specifically only an indication for men. So E. coli is a bad bug, can cause a lot of different issues. And so for us to answer this question, we put female health very much as a priority. Mainly because women are so disproportionately affected. However, in our target product profile, we were intentional to, at least at the moment, not only focus on women, because we do know how much of an unmet need there is in men as well as it relates to prostatitis. So this is something that we could take offline and I could talk ad nauseum about. But it is important as you're selecting your indication to make sure that you either are or are not excluding patients based on that indication and based on what your product's capability is. All right, we have time probably for one last question before we wrap it up. Let me see here. Okay, maybe in one sentence or two sentences, should the TPP cater to the market indication for use or for the proof of concept needed to tech transfer the technology to pharmaceutical companies? So, Obadiah, we'll start with you to end it. Should the TPP cater to the market indication or proof of concept needed for tech transfer to the pharma companies?
Yeah, so we're always thinking about TPPs in the context of the indication. I think that's always the goal. How you get there will be part of your clinical development plan, which might be a topic for another day, with the INCATE group. Yeah, my 2 cents.
Thank you. Dr. Leander?
Fully agree. It's really meant for the whole product for the end, irrespective who is going to finish it up.
Dr. Kerstin?
Yeah, the same opinion also from me. You definitely have to look at the complete product because you can imagine that the other side is looking in the same way. So you would not fully understand the situation of handing over the product in a tech transfer situation if you didn't do that.
Completely agree. We didn't talk about it much, bringing the pharmaceutical companies to the plate, but as part of speaking to the patient experience, most of the large pharmas have entire departments built out for this. So you get a little bit of that pharma company insight by talking to the patients, but of course, pharma companies will need to be part of this conversation as you develop your product. So thank you all for your questions. I'll turn it over to Peter to end us out.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. It is almost a cliffhanger talking about the pharma companies and certainly an proof that we could go and we eventually should go again to that subject. It is also a living discussion, not only a living document. Thank you very, very much to all the speakers for sharing your experiences. It is a breathful of memories. I'm sure I'm almost myself will go again to the recording and look it up again. Thank you also to you, Amanda. A terrific job having managed the questions and the speakers, and congratulations to the timing. It is perfect, like we like it in Switzerland. So it's terrific. It was a big pleasure having you with us. It was also a big pleasure to having the audience with us. I will end by displaying how to reach out to INCATE. So if you feel like your questions haven't been addressed or you didn't want to share it, or you have comments to us, please come and reach out. As you've seen at the very beginning, whoever also is seeking for advice or community, we offer that to everyone who approaches to us. And in that sense, watch out to our next activities. We'll certainly take care of the talents out there in AMR and looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you very, very much and see you next time.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks and take care and see you.